authorize somebody to get access to your medical records. Medical records are protected. I can't just go to Walgreens and say, give me the medical records for my wife. You know, they want to see my wife. This is privacy protected. Your son can't go for you and let me see the prescription list, or let me see all the records. I think they made a mistake in his surgery or something like that. You can only go if you have this paper here, the HIPAA release or the HIPAA authorization. Okay? This is also just a backup paper. Always do it with your will. And lastly, we're going to talk about the most important, actually, out of all of these. Oh, actually, it's after this, not this one. This one here is the declaration of the guardian of the person. This is a piece of paper where if something happens to you, you're in a vegetative state, you name somebody who is going to take care of your person. Remember, the other one was guardian of the estate. That person takes care of your money. This person here doesn't take care of your money, doesn't raise lawsuits on your behalf. This person takes care of your body. He feeds you, he takes you places, he directs your education and health, right? So just in case something happens, and God forbid, it's good to have somebody named in advance. If you don't, then perhaps you'll have somebody taking care of you who you don't want. You don't want that person to be taking care of you, right? And lastly, the most important one here is a long name, declaration of agent to dispose of remains. Forget that name. What this is, you name somebody who is going to take care of your funeral. Now what happened, and all of us know, there was an issue here in the community. He was a Muslim. He passed away in a car accident. His wife wanted to cremate him. His father said, no, that's haram, as we know. You shouldn't. We want to have just the white cloth Muslim burial. I mean, come on. And then she also said, I want to have in the church and stuff like that. And he said, no, we want to have the janazah, right? So what happened? They had a little fight. And then the wife, without his dad knowing, she cremated him right away. And they contacted us, and we were going to help him and stuff like that. And unfortunately, he didn't have this. You see what happened? If he would have had this, and he had the provisions, I want to have Islamic burial, etc., no cremation, I want to be buried around Muslims, then that wouldn't have happened. So, just be careful when you do your will. Have these. And of course, you can do your will, however you want. You can do it mostly Islamic, as we were talking, as Islamic as you can. Nothing is 100% going to mesh, right? But yeah. Have a chat with us, inshallah.
Thank you. Great. Usually when we go to any physician or admitted in the hospital, they get assigned some papers, getting some sort of authorization. We blindly sign, a lot of community.
Yeah.
When we go to doctor or hospital or anywhere, they want us to sign. What are those papers?
Those, usually, I have no idea, but those are usually just saying, hey, you recognize the risk. But they're not going to make you sign this stuff. This stuff needs witnesses. This stuff needs notaries. Somebody to stamp it. So that's what it usually is. But the best thing is to read them.
But secondly, they ask the family members who can take care of themselves.
Yeah, but if you have these, it's much better.
They usually ask you, do you already have one?
Yeah,
right? So you need to make them aware.
Very
it's not
important.
Yeah, so if you have one, you let them know, so that way you don't have to do that. Right? Go ahead.
We had a case a few years back. A doctor from our community went on the Jum'ah prayer and said, I have the fatwa from Ashrabi in Egypt, Imam, that they can take the life of a person on vegetation. What is Islamic view of that?
Okay, well, unfortunately, none of us here are licensed physicians, nor are we Islamic scholars to give you that fatwa or that decision. You should have attended the Islamic Bioethics Conference, where they addressed that for 7 hours, that whole day, in Baylor, St. Luke's.
I had the help of the care for 3 days in the federal court, in the civil court, for 3 days, and we reversed the idea. And we got that child back. He was a young, 20 years old college boy. And he's still alive.
Okay, alhamdulillah. All right, one more.
question?
Yes.
If you put down your will, then it should be, your burial should be performed according to Islamic way. That's good enough.
Yes, that actually is. You just need to be in writing, whether it's in your will or it's not. It's good. However, very good one. I always, when I do a will, always write it again, copy paste in another document. Why? Because you're going to put people usually like to hide their wills. This one, so when something happens, you got to look for your will. Where is it? And they won't find it, and there are going to be problems. This one here, copy paste in another document, sign it, notarize it, put it on your fridge. You see? That way, I'm not going to find it.
Great.
Too many pictures.
Yeah, put it on your fridge. All right? All right.
All right, one more.
And then, one more.
Usually ICNA and IHJ provide this will services, Islamic.
I'll address
Do you
that.
have, yeah.
Okay, so as I was speaking with Farha here, the will, if you want to make it Islamic, you got to make sure you're doing it right. Here we have, as Relay talk to us about, we have community property. Okay, it's very, like if I do a will right now, I'm only going to be giving away half of what I own, right? So if I have my law firm now, and my wife, she's working, she has her own job, and I do a will with the Islamic proportions, I'm only going to give away half of my law firm. What about the other half? She takes it. Is this Islamic? For her to inherit half of the law firm? Well, perhaps not. I mean, unless we agree. I agree and I give her that half in a nuptial agreement, then that's okay. But, so be careful when you do the Islamic wills, that's not enough. Absolutely not enough. And you want to make sure that what you give is according to the Islamic percentages. That is written in Surah An-Nisa, as well known in the Quran. All right? You don't want to inherit. A lot of people say, I want to give. First, they come with spouses. I want to give my half to her, and she gives my half to me when we pass away. But then when they pass away, then we want to give it to Islamically. This is half. This is half, non-Islamic, half Islamic. You want to make sure, you're doing everything correctly. But because of community property laws, make sure you come to somebody who's not only good with the American law, but he knows the Islamic law too. And consulted with the shuyukh and with the scholars who know the fiqh, the Islamic law as well. Jazakallah khair.
Let's move on to our final speaker. So it's Zainab Boswell, and she's going to be speaking about immigration options for vulnerable populations. Just a brief background on her. She's been practicing immigration law here in the Houston area. As a daughter of Indian Muslims, she definitely understands the difficulties that there can be in the immigration system. So she's been an attorney since 2011, and she's worked on a lot of these cases. So please welcome her.
Thank you. So I'm going to speak to everybody today about some immigration options for vulnerable populations, people that are in difficult situations. So this is Pro Bono Week, so we organized this, but October is also Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So some of my topics are going to touch on that topic as well, okay? And I'm also going to cover options that cover the spectrum on the immigration ladder, from the bottom rung, so to speak. We'll start with the first one. So humanitarian parole is an application that can be filed for somebody who's currently not in the country. So a foreign national can come to the United States for a temporary purpose if there is a showing of a compelling emergency, okay? The compelling emergency, the most often easily approved or relatively easily approved with immigration, right, is medical situations, family reunification when minors are involved, and then if someone has to be in attendance at civil or criminal court proceedings. So most recently at my firm, we obtained humanitarian parole for a son to come to the United States for 3 months because his mom had terminal cancer. He came, 2 weeks later she died, he performed his final rites and he went back. But he was able to come for that period of time based on this humanitarian parole option, okay? So that was the bottom rung where we're talking about an option for someone who's not in the country. As long as you can go to the next slide. The next application I'm going to talk about is for somebody who resides in the United States, okay? And this is for a dependent spouse of a non-immigrant visa category. So, for example, there's 4 categories that are relevant to this application, but the most common one, I think, in our community is H visas. So H-1B, okay? Someone on an H-1B came a few months ago and their spouse came. The spouse is the H-4 visa holder. So this application, the 765V application, allows that dependent spouse to file for work authorization if they can show that they have been battered or subject to extreme cruelty. Okay, so the standard for the abuse involved is when the visa holder is abusing the spouse who's the dependent on their status. And these are people who are in non-immigrant categories. So we're not at the green card or citizenship stage. This is below that, so to speak, okay, on the ladder. This application allows them to work for a period of 2 years, and there's a possibility of renewal. It does not affect their underlying status. So they can still be the H-4 visa holder, and they have the right to work if they have a showing of being subjected to battery or extreme cruelty, okay? And so now we're gonna move up the ladder to the next slide. First one, thank you. Okay, so this next category is for an application for the spouse, parent, or child of an abusive U.S. citizen or an abusive green card holder, okay? So the person who has been brought into the country, the foreign national, the immigrant, parent, child, or spouse can self-petition on this application. Again, the showing standard for abuse is battery or subject to extreme cruelty. Okay, and we'll talk more about what that means. This is it's called the I-360 VAWA self-petition. Okay, and this is something you file for yourself. You don't require the spouse or the person that is subjecting you to this, like your parent or child, to sign the form. This is something you can do for yourself if you're in this kind of a situation. Okay, and along with proving the abuse, you have to prove the relationship, and there are very specific timelines, and you have to show that you resided together. So you have to have the appropriate documentation. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, and the next slide is, the writing is small, and I'm gonna go through with you guys right now, but these are some examples of what counts as battery and extreme cruelty, okay? There's some very commonly understood concepts of what it means to be in an abusive situation. Sometimes in our communities, our tolerance level is unusually high, okay? So I'm gonna talk about what qualifies with regards to this immigration application, okay? So the first, you can't read it from here, but I'll read it out to you. The first is any act of violence, okay? That's common, people understand that if you're hit, that's an act of violence. But a threatened act of violence is also abuse. It's qualifying abuse. I am going to kill you, or I have a gun and you show someone the gun. That is qualifying abuse, okay? So that's not just the actual violence, but the threatened violence. Psychological abuse, economic abuse, you can't have any money, you can't have credit cards, you're not allowed to get a job. All of that is also qualifying abuse. Okay, so threats based on someone's immigration status. If someone tells you that I am going to get you deported, or I'm gonna call ICE to take you away, those statements are qualifying abuse for these standards, okay? So sometimes these are not things that we consider abuse, and you wouldn't go, call the police about it. Well, he said this to me, or she said this to me. But it happens, and it is abuse, and it is qualifying. So these types of applications, the law is kind of broader, I think, than a lot of people understand it with respect to these situations. So if you know someone who's in a situation like this, you can advise them to get the proper help, to find the right person to talk to and find out if this is actually a real thing that they can get done. So again, this is a self-petition. The I-360 is a self-petition, okay? If it's approved, the person who applied can obtain a green card, like they'll become a lawful permanent resident. So they've moved up on that rung, right? They're no longer non-immigrants. They can apply to adjust status and become a lawful permanent resident. Okay, so now we're going to the top rung. You're applying for citizenship, okay? Citizenship is when you become a U.S. citizen, is when a foreign national is, given the certain rights to vote, and it requires testing and filling out the right application. You have to have been a lawful permanent resident for a certain number of years. You have to meet the continuous presence requirements, and the physical presence requirements, and the good moral character requirements. But you also have to be able to pass an English test, written and oral, and you have to be able to answer questions about US government and history, okay? So there is a waiver that I'm gonna talk about next. So there's a medical disability waiver. The waiver allows people with a mental or physical disability to get an exception and not take the test. Not take the English test, not take the civics test, okay? But the application for this disability exception requires, again, a showing of what the disability is and how the disability is connected to your ability to learn the information required. So most commonly, elderly people who have Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, senile dementia, people who have a condition that affects their memory, right? They're the ones that are gonna qualify for this exception. I have diabetes and high blood pressure. No, that doesn't qualify you for not writing the test, okay? This form has to be filled out by a doctor, a medical doctor, osteopathic doctor, or licensed psychologist. And again, the relationship between the condition and why you can't learn the information is the most relevant part of this. Okay, so I was also gonna tell you that right now, these medical disability waivers are being looked at with a little bit more intensity than they have been in the past. So you may be asked questions like, is the doctor that filled out the form the same doctor who treats you regularly? How extensive are your medical records? When you first became a lawful permanent resident, did you reveal that you had this condition, or did it just, come up when you had to take the test, sort of thing? Those kinds of things. Some of those questions are completely out of line and unlawful, like the actual officer should not be asking you that. But if you go to an interview where you're seeking an exception and you're unrepresented, you don't know. Okay, so you end up being in the situation where the officer kind of hustles you into saying something or admitting something that may or may not be true or false. So you need to go to these sort of situations with representation. Even for all the applications I discussed, from humanitarian parole to get somebody here for the compelling emergency, the application for the work card for the non-immigrant abused spouse, for the I-360, and then for this final exception, all of these are not simple processes, okay? There's very specific timelines, relationship information, context, and they require that you seek the right type of help to do so, okay? So the next slide is a list of nonprofits in the local area that help immigrants. So some of them help people with only certain types of petitions. Okay, some of them will only do asylum, some of them will only work with women and children, and some will only work with children. So you might have to call around to find the right type of help, but these are for pro bono legal services. And then the last slide is just my information. I'm practiced locally in Texas and Katy, and I do understand Urdu, Gujarati, and Hindi. My communication back to you might not be so good, but you'll understand what I'm saying.
No, you're doing good. Very
Sure, sir.
Okay, your first category, humanitarian parole.
Yes.
We had a case a couple of years back, an elderly person visiting from Pakistan. He had no blood relatives here, so he was gonna die. I mean,
Yes.
doctor said a few
Okay.
days. So we informed his family to get somebody here, at least
Yeah.
somebody should be here. His son applied, didn't get the visa. Could we have done something differently to?
So humanitarian parole actually requires that the applicant get denied a visitor visa. So
Okay.
once that son
Okay, so-
was denied a visitor visa, the next step would have been to
Okay.
have
Attorney?
an attorney file what's
Okay,
called
we
an
didn't-
I-131 application
Okay.
and rush that petition. Expedited, this is a life or
I
death
didn't know that,
situation, we have 2 weeks.
Okay, good information.
Okay, so that requires an underlying denial of a visitor visa.
Good, thank you.
Sanjay, can you tell us about how the process works, or just give us a summary of adopting a child from overseas, or which countries are allowed?
So like that's like a 3-hour topic. So I can't actually, I'm not, we would probably need like a family attorney, an adoption attorney, and then I'd cover the immigration angle. But adopting a child from overseas, depending on if it's a Hague country or non-Hague country, and whether or not you've already had the home study done, there's a whole bunch of moving factors there. So
It's
it
too
would-
complicated.
It's too complicated, it wouldn't make
I
sense.
have a
to me.
question.
Sure.
Can I? Okay. So with the VAWA, a lot of people have problems laying the foundation for the abuser, saying to show the documents that he's a citizen or an LPR, because of course the abuser is not going to give you the documents establishing, the citizenship. How do you circumvent that requirement?
So that's like part of what I do with, for some of my clients. So for example, to prove that someone's a US citizen, I can look up your voter registration, okay? I can look up your voter registration, that's public information. I'll print that out and I'll ask the Vermont Service Center, which is where all the VAWA petitions get sent to, okay? The sensitive cases get processed in Vermont, and those people know what they're doing. So I will tell them, hey, I've given you the voter registration. Now can you please look up this information and confirm that my abusive spouse is a US citizen? Because clearly, I'm in an abusive situation and then he's not gonna hand over his, naturalization slip or his birth certificate to me. That's something that the government does work with you on, okay? And proving the abuse, like I said, threats are abuse. So how do you prove that? You have to write a statement. You have to speak up for yourself and relay your story to the government. And that has to be done clearly, it has to be done with details, and it has to be done in a timely fashion. So again, this is where you work very closely with your attorney, right? So like someone might come in and they may not think this behavior they're living with qualifies for this type of a petition. But if you ask the right questions, sometimes you learn more than they wanted to share, and then you can go into, it just depends on who you're meeting with and how you're asking the right questions to get the right information. But, you know what I mean? Like, it's a strategy thing as well, so. Yes, sir.
If a legal immigrant, if he meets all the requirements for citizenship, however, if they find a criminal record against him, does it?
Yes, so the good moral character requires that you not have that criminal record for the preceding 5 years, and depending on what type of crime it is, even if it's old. I had a client come in the other day, 15-year-old case. They asked for her arrest records. She gave them all their records ahead of time, but because the one arrest record was not in the file, they denied her application. So we're appealing that decision because that's just completely that's completely unfair. But no, the timeline for any criminal history is relevant to a naturalization application. If you have anything that you're wondering about with regard to a naturalization application, that's when you see a qualified immigration attorney for an evaluation. Bring your documents and have them look at it. It's not something you should do alone. Because then, like I said, you'll go in there and they'll be like, well, where's this, where is that? And you won't know what they're talking about. It's true. Yes, ma'am?
That's honorary degree that they give someone an honorary citizenship. And can that person file for a child of theirs?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the first part.
Honorary citizenship.
Honorary citizenship for whom?
For a parent. If you get an honorary citizenship, can you use that to file for a relative?
I don't know what you mean by an honorary citizenship.
Okay, back in my country, like 10 years back.
Oh, you mean if you are here and you have you have a parent abroad? Sorry.
There's a World Health Organization person from Nigeria who came to this country and was awarded 2 states honorary citizenship of this country. So with that, is it a valid status for the person?
So it sounds to me like he was maybe awarded something by like the state of Texas or the state of Michigan.
Exactly.
That has nothing to do with naturalization. No.
It doesn't.
No, I don't believe so.
Maybe one more question?
I have a patient here who is a cancer patient and needing bone marrow transplant. And her son is in somewhere in Nigeria. He's already having a match.
He's a match.
He's a match.
Okay.
So she need to bring her son to America. So is there any way?
So the first thing that I mentioned, the humanitarian parole. The son needs to go as soon as possible and apply for a visitor visa. If he gets denied, then you need to find an attorney for her to apply for humanitarian parole, to have her son come here. And the parole means that he can come here for a temporary purpose. It is not status, it is not a visa, it gives nothing underlying. It's just coming here to address that immediate situation. I think we're done.
Yes. Great.
For now, just one
I
question.
just want to make one comment. It's based on marriage, and because we meet with people from different cultural communities, and I got a text message asking. I thought it's very relevant because I will need some community support for this. I don't know how many of you know, but right now in Texas, It is, for 150 years, we had a law that said that you could marry your first cousin in Texas. It is illegal since 2005. But that's not the only part that's illegal. If you are legally married to your first cousin in another state or another country and you move to Texas, the living together is illegal. It is a third-degree felony. Okay? Now, nobody has decided to go to the DA's office and file charges, but technically, someone can make a big deal about it. It is a very badly written law, as no one has brought it up. And those are some things that I think when you have a badly written law, that really should be changed. Even though it may not be effective, it shouldn't be sitting on the books, because if you did something legally, it should be recognized in Texas. But the way the law is phrased, it makes the living together with your first cousin an illegal act, right? So this is something that we really make sure we want to educate people about it, especially when they're marrying people. At this time, when you have these religious ceremonies, nobody should be marrying first cousins in the state of Texas. You will have to find another state to do that. I believe that's Florida, and there are a few other states.
You scared me.
Yeah, really have to go across the border, stay for a couple of days, get married.
Very good, the whole crowd's heard now.
Yeah, that's what I want this to be a community discussion and get bad laws off the books.
Well, let's have one more, sorry.
I just have a comment. We are with Asian Against Domestic Violence, and she was talking about what we are addressing. So if anyone is interested and wants to know about our organization, we are here to help.
Can you say your organization one more time?
Asian Against Domestic Violence.
Known as ADA.
ADA. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for that announcement. So first, I'd like to thank all our speakers. We can give them another round of applause. I'd like to thank Shifa. I heard there's a rumor that there's food. Is that true? Okay, figure it out. So yeah, so please stick around. Yeah, I mean, you can all freely mingle around. I think we're gonna get some food and stuff, and some of the attorneys might also hang back. So, but just remember they're here with some time, so they might not have time to look over all your documents and stuff. But
Excuse me, just 1 minute, please.
Just one document. Sorry, one thing from Mr. Maarfani.
Thank you very much, everybody. I would like to thank you and the Muslim Bar Association of Houston. We have the food ready, we have the social hour, so please join us, inshallah.
Practice, you know.
Good job.